Hey everybody, today we are going to dive right in and learn the basics of Adobe Illustrator. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be working on a Mac platform, so all of these shortcuts will be Mac-based shortcuts. I'll try to tell you some of the PC-based shortcuts as we get going, but let's just start by opening the program. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to do Illustrator and open up Adobe Illustrator here, and we will get our icon. Your icon may look a little different depending on what version of Illustrator you are using. Alright, so when we start, I open up my Illustrator, and yours may look a little different, but my Illustrator is version CS6, and on the CS6 series, they went to a darker interface. It's supposedly supposed to be easier on the eyes and so forth. We're going to look into how to change this in a little bit. The first thing I do when I open up any Illustrator on my computer or another computer is I go to the top right hand corner and I look at my workspaces. And what these are customizable layouts for you guys to use specific tool sets. Now what I usually do is go to Essentials, and I'm going to go to Reset Essentials, and that's going to kind of take everything back to a neutral state. So go ahead and reset your Essentials if you're following along with me at home. Alright. Before we go and open a new document, we're going to go and look at our preferences. And this is very important because the preferences really hide some of our more commonly used elements. For instance, we're going to look here, and we don't touch all of them. Usually I, for the most part, keep them by default. But it's a good idea to go through and really look through some of these. For instance, guides, when we use rulers, you can change the color. You can use dots instead of lines. You can have a grid set up. There's all sorts of custom display options. One that we may use often is user interface, and this will allow us to change it back to an Adobe CS5 or earlier lighter interface, or keeping the dark interface as you can see here. You can even change the darkness as we go. For the canvas color, that's usually the background here. I'm going to keep ours to dark, just because most of you will do this. You'll see file handling, and then also finally the appearance of black. We're going to talk about that as we go on. This is basically meant for printing, so when you print, there's different variants of the color black you could use. In this case, you can see the difference, so we can kind of set what our black is going to come out as. Alright, I didn't change much in there, if anything. Let's go ahead and dive right in and start with a new document. So after you reset your workspace, we're going to go ahead and create new. Now, by default, when you open up a new document, you're going to see a couple of options. First, document name. I normally don't name mine before I start working. If you wanted to, we can call this test, and let's say interface demo. Alright. And we can set it up for print, web, and you can see we have some custom web sizes here. Film or video, if you're familiar with that, set it up to do something with HD video, RGB, and so forth. We're going to go with print. And the common Illustrator size is a letter size. Now, you may notice the width and the height are dealt with in points. That's not really going to help me, so I'm going to turn it to inches. That helps. Now, being that we are using Illustrator, we don't want to think in pixels. Remember, raster images are pixels. Illustrator are vector objects, or mathematical objects that constantly rasterize and constantly look sharp and clear, non-dependent on the size, I should say. So, what we're going to do is start. Now, we have templates. You can go and load up specific templates in here, for instance, like a DVD screen, some brochures, and all that. We're gonna keep it all default. You're gonna look here, and the pixels per inch here for the print would be 300. We're gonna hit OK, and you're gonna open your document. Now, documents are referred to in Illustrator as artboards, A-R-T-B-O-A-R-D-S, artboards. And artboards are basically anything that is shown in this white canvas area will render. Everything outside of it will not. And that's very important. We can change this through document setup. We can set, again, the color and the size and the transparency. We can edit our artboards again, shrink them, make them bigger or smaller. It's up to you. You simply hit enter and then OK to get out of that, and we can move on by clicking away. We also have our preferences, like we did in the beginning. If you're sick of the user interface, you can go ahead and make that the medium dark or whatnot that you like. And we have all kind of different colors of, our backgrounds and stuff that's manageable. All right, so let's get started. The first thing you're going to notice is, most likely you're going to notice this kind of menu bar. This bar up here is basically attached to these tools in our toolbox on the left-hand side. And I've provided you guys with the link for Adobe Illustrator Help that will basically talk about each tool. And we're going to talk about it in brief detail here, but in the write-up it kind of goes into a little more in-depth detail. So anytime I click on a tool, items change up here, and those are our additional options. Some have a lot of detail, others do not. One of the first things I like to do when I start with Illustrator, and this is a personal preference, is I like to deal with rulers. I'm very organized, so I'm going to go to View, Rulers, Show Rulers. We may use these later on. And I'm also going to turn on my Smart Guides. This is a relatively new feature, and it's very, very helpful for you guys to kind of get a understanding of order and alignment and things like that. And we'll talk a little more about Smart Guides as we go. All right, now you'll notice we have the ruler on the artboard. In Illustrator CS6, we have an Artboards menu. Now these are our palettes on the side here, and if we open the menu or the palette for the artboard, you'll notice we can actually add additional artboards. And this is really nice if you're producing multiple comps or multiple pieces of artwork for a client. All right, so let's get going. We're going to close this little palette here. We have all sorts of palettes, which we'll kind of go over as we go on. The very first thing we need to do is we need to make a shape in Illustrator. That's how we're going to dive in. And our shapes are basically not created with the first few tools. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go down and you're going to have to hit M on your keyboard, and when I hit M here, I'm going to hold down my left mouse button, and you're going to see I have multiple tools in here. So that's very important to kind of go through and figure it out. So we're going to start with a rectangle, simple shape. Now, this rectangle will take the attributes of our color panel. Now, this box is the fill, that's the X. And if I hit X back and forth, it will kind of activate them back and forth. And if I double click on them, it will give me a color picker. So for instance, if I want my fill to be red, I go ahead and draw, and I'm clicking and dragging, and I'm going to kind of get my little arrow tool here and click away. You're going to see what we get is, and let me zoom in, Z for zoom, you're going to see we have a red fill and a black stroke. Now, you may have noticed you have some options for stroke and fill up here as well. And it says hold shift key to bring up an alternate one. We can do that. We can get swatches. It's up to you guys. If I wanted to change this to yellow, well, it didn't change. Now we get to use our toolboxes. So we have two types of selections. All right. And I'm hitting my space bar here to kind of move my area. Notice I get my hand tool with my space bar. Helps me move around. I'm going to use my selection tool. That's V on your keyboard. Notice when I hover over my selection tools, any tool, it will give me a little letter on the side. That's your shortcut. So we're going to start with the selection tool. Now if I marquee over this, what you'll notice is this allows me to move the entire object. A lot of you are wondering, well, what are these tools? Well, the tool right here, and you can see there's a little itty bitty arrow, so when I hold down it will let me know there's more. The tools right here will allow us to select points. This is the direct select tool. So if I hover over a point and I grab it, now I can manipulate just that point. And I can begin to make really any shape I'd like here. I'm going to just kind of make kind of a chevron-esque looking shape here, and so forth. So again, it allows me to manipulate that, and we'll go into that in a little detail. Now, going back to the direct selection tool, or from the direct selection tool to the current selection tool, this, once selected, will allow me to change the color of perhaps my stroke, or like I mentioned before, the fill. It has to be selected to change. If I click away and then I try to change something, nothing's happening. So what I'm going to do is highlight it. highlight it with my selection tool, get the bounding box, the transform box, and I'm going to go ahead and change the color. We're going to change the stroke, and we're going to make it, I'll make it a darker green. Now our stroke size, then once selected, can give us the ability of that kind of outline that we're looking for. And going back to the direct selection, I can hover around the outside, I can rotate. If I hold down Shift and Alt, I can scale uniformly. And this never changes in quality because it is a vector shape. And we have other options too. We have uniform, we have profile widths, and those profile widths are the width of your stroke. Notice the more I change this, the more varied line quality it gives me on this stroke. We have thick and then it goes to thin here. We also have, and I'm going to set this back to uniform, our lines. We can make it look more like a paintbrush, and we can make it look more ornamented, like, I don't know what this really is, but something like this. And we're going to talk more about this when we talk about brushes. We can even make it look more artsy and whatnot. We're going to lower that to give it more of a round look. When we get into brushes in detail, we're going to talk more all about how to add more here, how to get custom brushes, how to kind of change up specific profiles on the fly, and so forth. All sorts of fun stuff. All right. Opacity. Opacity will change simply that. It'll be how transparent the object is. So I'm going to put mine to 100% so you can see it. Styles. Styles are simply effects that you can put on it. In this case, I have a drop shadow. It doesn't really do much because this shape wasn't really built for that as of yet. Next to that, we can recolor our artwork, and it will give us custom palettes, and we can kind of change and play around with current palettes. So if I want to change it a little bit, I can do that. So there's multiple ways to do something. We have alignment tools as well, and those don't really do much until when I use my alignment tool, I can align it with another object. All right, so what I have now is this nice chevron. Let's go ahead and let's draw another object. We'll draw an ellipse, and on this one, we're going to double click. I'm going to make it like an orangish color. Oh, see, now I have that selected. Illustrator's tricky here. Let's try this now. There we go. When in doubt, click away. And if I don't want a line around it, I simply hit this button. It's none. If I were up here, I would just go to the top corner and hit none. Now I'm not going to get a stroke around this. I'm going to hold Shift and draw my circle and get this shape right here. Now, Illustrator is very, very nice when it comes to moving shapes, because what I can do is not only draw shapes, draw lines, use brushes, manipulate them. I manipulate them by these anchor points. And in this case, this anchor point, I'm using my direct selection tool, has a Bezier handle. And this Bezier handle allows me to manipulate and warp. Once I do click on that, I have an ability to convert these. I can make it linear, I can make it look like a teardrop or a water droplet. We can kind of get it up here and play with it this way. There's a lot of really cool options. I can stretch that, and I want you guys to explore these because these are very, very helpful as you develop your shape building attributes here in Illustrator. All right, and these are just simple, simple shapes. Again, I can come into here and move the chevron out of the way, and I'm going to use A, the letter A here, for my direct selection tool. I'm going to highlight this point. Now, when I select it, I can convert this to a rounder shape. Kind of move that outward, and we'll do the same here. We'll convert it. Now we can get more of a kind of a retro, vintage kind of pair of shapes going on here. So now we have two shapes. Now, our shapes are unique. Once we start putting things on the board, you guys now know how to move them around. You know how to change the color. If I want to change the color, I directly select it with the V tool, and I simply double click, and we'll make it blue. We'll make it like a water drop here, bluish purple, and we will kind of move it back and forth. Now, what if I want to put this shape on top of this shape? Well, there's multiple ways we can do that. Let's see. Well, like Photoshop, if you're familiar with that, This is basically like a digital collage. We're stacking objects on top of one another to achieve a final result. Now I'm going to go to something called my Layers palette. And if you can't find these in any Adobe program, if you go to the Window attribute, you'll see Layers. And when I open this up, it's a little different than Photoshop, for those of you familiar. You're going to see I only have one layer, but I have two things. Well, what happened? Well, there's this little drop-down arrow, and let me zoom in here so you guys can see. And when I open and close that, you'll notice these are actually called paths. And this blue box, as it says, and Illustrator is really helpful, indicates selected artwork. So if I wanted to select the other artwork, the other path, I can do that. Now, the order of these can be shifted. I left-click and drag, and I can put them on top of one another. And that will change the arrangement. Now, there are other ways to do this. I can create a new layer. I can drag, click and hold and drag to this one. I can turn the eyeball on and off. I can move my layers around. That works. If they're housed within the same layer, think of this more as like a folder or a group. All I can do, and this is my method, is I right-click, I hold down my right mouse button on the shape, and I do Arrange, and bring forward and bring back. Now this is your Command key, and this is your bracket key. So when I say right-click, Arrange, Send to Back, it switches them for me. And when you get really good with this, you can use your bracket keys. Those are next to the letter P on your keyboard, and go back and forth here. All right. So we have the ability to do that now. We can create new layers. You can lock your layers. You can lock a specific path. At this point, I can only move one thing. I can't grab it because it's locked. And I can lock all of them if I have to. So we have a lot of control. So that's our Layers palette. And our layers and our artboard palettes are usually housed together. All right, now that we have our Layers palette and we understand our two direct selection tools, we've talked a little bit about strokes and whatnot. Let's turn off the stroke on this. We'll go to none. There we go. Click away. Kind of move them on top of one another. Let's discuss in a little more detail, and I'm going to kind of be anal retentive here. Just kind of try to make something that attempts to look like a shape. We're going to kind of go down the list. Our Lasso tool will highlight specific areas. You can see, just like Photoshop, we'll just highlight this, and then I can hit my direct select or my selection tool and move this up and down. Again, I can turn that into a point, take it away from a point by using this. I can also add points, and we're going to talk about this as we go on, and this will give us the ability to add different points as we go. Now that I have this kind of all set up, what I want to do is explore the pen tool. Now the pen tool is a very important tool in Illustrator. This tool will allow us, just by clicking and dragging, to create custom shapes. And we're going to close it here. You see the little circle here, it shows it closes. And this will allow us then to interact between the pen tool and the selection tools and really create uniform kind of custom handles, custom shapes, custom all sorts of stuff. So you guys can see that kind of come together and play out. Now, in addition, the pen tool has options. We have an add and we have a subtract. So if I select an area and I hover over the path, see the path right here? It has a plus sign, and I click, it will then add another anchor point. Let me zoom out here. You can see when I just clicked, it added another point. If I want to subtract from that point, use your selection tool, select the object, hover over it, click delete, and it will go away. Very, very nice tool. The convert anchor point, or Shift C, will allow us to do basically what this button does. So now I can click and drag, and it will give me that point. So I can do that to multiple ones here. If I click it once, it makes it linear. This is basically telling me I'm not clicking on an anchor point. I'm kind of double clicking here. There we go. We can kind of make it a diamond if we want to. There we go. All right. So what we have is the ability to manipulate shapes, stack shapes and can constantly add shapes. I'm going to go ahead and add a line, and I skipped over the text tool because that's kind of a tool within itself. And I have the ability now to do just that. I can add a simple line. Now you can see the line doesn't have a shape, or excuse me, a stroke or a fill. This is the fill, this is what's inside of it, and this is the stroke. So if I change it to a black stroke, and let's make that pretty high up, let's make that 6, you'll see I get a thick line. If I change this to a brown fill, not much happens. Well, the reason nothing is happening here is because a fill needs to have multiple lines connected to make a shape. This takes us all the way back to like geometry class here. So we're going to constantly continue the ability to kind of line these up. Now you see those green lines? Those are your smart filters. Those are really cool, or the smart guides I should say. I'm going to hold, you can see the degrees here, I'm going to kind of line it up straight. If I were to duplicate this, so I went to Object and I tried to duplicate it or copy and paste, or here's copy, we'll paste it, Command B, paste right there. And we line them up. This will also let us know when they're exactly apart, when they're lined up, and those are your smart guides, and that's what I enabled a while back when I enabled this. Alright, well there's a lot easier ways to duplicate things in Illustrator. So let's go ahead and just highlight, and you can see I need to get back to my move tool. Highlight everything, and I'm going to hit delete. It's gone. Let's make some shapes. Let's go ahead and let's make a stroke, and let's do another shape here. I'm going to click away, and let's change the color of this. We'll make it red, and we'll have the fill maybe be blue. Really not worrying about prettiness right now. Do this. That looks great. And there's all sorts of cool tools we're going to learn about to kind of make us have the ability to make these look prettier. But right now we have two shapes. We'll look at our layers palette, and we'll notice we have path 1 and path 2. If I double click in there, I can name it ball color. Double click, stroke, ball. Layer 1 I can call ball layer. There we go, and hit enter to get out of that. We have the ability to create sublayers, again, underneath. We have the ability to search for layers. We don't have a lot going on here. And also delete a layer or a sublayer. You can also click and drag down to any of these, and it will delete the one or whatnot. To go back, I'm hitting Command Z, and that will undo the layer. So to redo, you hold Command Shift Z. Alright. So now I have these, and I have some options, okay? Again, I'm going to kind of move them side to side here. We're going to kind of play around a little bit, see what we can make, and whatnot. Now, I mentioned we have brush profiles, so the first thing we're going to do is maybe change the profile of this to make it look a little more hip and cool. We'll do the same here. We'll change it to that. And I'm going to hover outside of it with my direct selection tool. Kind of rotate it downward. And so forth. Alright, so we have our two. We have the ability to, again, arrange them. Send forward, bring forward, move back to get that kind of interesting shape. And in addition, with these, again, we can change the color and whatnot. We have the addition to do some really cool things. One of the coolest things that was just created in Illustrator is instead of using your profile, you can actually select this and you can use a profile width tool. And this is a really great tool. This will allow us to kind of click and drag on anchor points and kind of play around. And this, I mean, this looks really weird, but play around with the width of our fill, or our stroke, pardon me. So again, I can stretch this and do a lot of different things. So we have that. On top of this, we can actually start playing with the shapes themselves. So right now, these are two separate shapes. All right, we have a stroke and a fill. Now, if I want to make the stroke a shape in itself, well, I can't really do that. It's just a line. It's invisible. To mess with an object, which this is, we need to explore our object panel. Okay, now this is very important. The object panel is basically where most of the meat and the tools and the stuff in Illustrator that you're going to do often resides. We have transforming, which is rotation, scales, things like that. You've seen me just kind of use my my selection tool, my V hotkey on my keyboard, and I kind of move it around and scale it or hover around it and rotate it. Well, I'm going to go and kind of look through there. You can see that. I have a range, which we've seen before when we right-click. We have group. So we can grab these, group them, and it will create its own sublayer inside. So now we can move them together. Pretty cool stuff. Hit Command-Z, and I'm kind of ungroup them there. Or I could have hit ungroup. We can lock the layers. That's the same as doing this here. We can hide the layers. That's the same as turning the eyeball on and off. So basically what we have done is we've given the ability to really customize our shapes and eventually build some really high-end graphics. Now, in the next panel, you're going to see we have a lot of options. For instance, I'm going to click away and grab one here. We have one called Expand and Expand Appearance. Now, if they're grayed out, that just means you can't use them with your current settings. Expand Appearance is really interesting. What it will do, and I'm going to go ahead and click it, is it will create a shape. You can see now it outlined with anchor points my shape of my stroke. And this is a very cool tool because if you want to start customizing, making your own shapes, we can kind of do that. Now, the trick with Illustrator with file size is the more little points, I'm going to hit Z for zoom or go to my zoom tool, the more points we have, the more detail we get. Now, if you hold your Alt key on the zoom, you can zoom out, and vice versa. So Alt key or your Option key, depending what keyboard you're using. So now this is all a shape. And it didn't really change much. It's still very straightforward. We also have the ability, let's go ahead and select this again, to rasterize. We can go ahead and turn this into a rastered image. And raster images deal with pixels, pixels per inch. And this will allow me to go ahead and click that, and now it's a picture. I can save it as a JPEG, whatnot. If I zoom in, you can see right here it has the anti-aliasing, and if we look next to it, to its neighbor, this is the one that's still vector. This one's very clean. This one's really jaggedy. Okay, so that's our anti-aliasing kind of happening right there. All right, so very important stuff. All right, the whole point of this lesson is for you guys basically to get comfortable moving around here. We haven't really touched on the ruler guides yet. We're going to get to that. We can actually talk about it right now. If you ever want to set up kind of some boundaries, you can basically click into the gray area and drag, or the black area, and drag down. And you can get guides, and you can kind of set up your own ruler guides. If you want to get rid of them, you hover over them, and you just drag them off the page. And then poof, you're done. Okay, you can also just hit delete, and they'll go away. All right, so we have that tool, we have our pen tool, we can draw custom shapes, we know how to expand these shapes, so we can expand the appearance. There's some other options which we're going to talk about in later tutorials for you guys on how to play with this. We can start to join objects, we can start to make patterns, blend objects, which is really cool, distort objects, so if I make with a kind of a mesh here, this will allow me to get, this is a cool one of my favorites. Get the direct selection tool here. Allow me to kind of warp it and make it look like something like Salvador Dali or whatnot. Really kind of a cool effect, and so forth. So we really have some really nice options. We can hit expand again. We'll make it an object. It will take the stroke away, and now we have some shapes. And even here, which is really cool, look at this. What we can do is quite amazing. We can actually break apart the pieces. We can also put them back together. It's very object-oriented in Illustrator. There's not a lot of painting or whatnot. It's more stacking things on top of each other, giving the illusion of something. In this case, we'll just kind of stack these maybe slightly on top of each other here. Let's see maybe what we get. Let's do this. There we go. So now we have a kind of a nice, maybe a drop shadow. I'll use my arrow keys. Make a button or something like that. Very cool stuff. All right, so we have our width profiles, we have our objects. We were talking about different tools in here. We can make masks, we can exclude areas. One of the biggest things though in Illustrator, and we're going to start over, we're going to draw two shapes, is the ability to combine shapes. Now, I'm going to go ahead and draw, I'm going to turn off my stroke for these for you. I'm going to draw two shapes. I'm going to draw an ellipse and a rectangle. And I'm going to put them on top of each other, kind of move them into place. And, everything looks fine and dandy. You can even do it this way if you want. In the end, though, if I go to my palette here, I have a couple different shapes. And we're going to delete our guide there. We have a couple different shapes. So there's still not a singular objects. We can group them, right? Highlight them both. Object group. That's okay. Or we can actually combine them. Here's where it gets really cool. I want you guys to go to Window, Pathfinder. Pathfinder is right here. This is going to be your best friend in Illustrator. Pathfinder is absolutely awesome. What the Pathfinder does, once things are selected, is it combines shapes. We can unite them. We can subtract the shape that's in front. We can intersect. Pretty cool. We can exclude. And then we have the ability to trim them and make holes and kind of cut away the pieces, almost like a cookie cutter at that point. So we're going to start with Unite. Let's go ahead and click it. Get your selection tool, highlight both layers here, this one, and hit Unite. All of a sudden we have one path. And that one path becomes editable. We can change it. We can kind of make it our own. And we have all sorts of cool options. So that's one way. The two shapes are gone. It's now one shape. We have the ability, here, let's go ahead and select it again. There we go. We can subtract it. So it's going to take the object, you can see minus front, in front of it, and simply keep these two objects. Now, if I moved this object to the back, our ball's in front. Let me show you that real quick. Make it a little darker. See, the ball is in front. What we'll do is minus front, and it will take the ball away. We have intersect. That will just keep the areas inside of them. And then we have exclude. That will take out the areas where they overlap. And it's totally transparent. You can see if I pull it off my artboard here, it's just a hole, like I cut a hole into it. Really amazing stuff. Now, the options in the Pathfinders mode are a little different. They basically leave your pieces, they leave your parts. So if I do the divide option, it seemingly is normal, but if I go back to my menu here, what you'll see is I have a lot more paths. What that kind of did was divide up all of these separately. So let's go ahead and click. There we go. So we can kind of separate all our little parts and make a shape and a logo or whatever you want to make. Really amazing stuff. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to hit Command-Z, go back to my two shapes. Grab them both, and let's see, which one is this? This is Trim. Okay. Trim opened up a new group too, and it looks like what Trim did was it kept the one in the front, but trimmed off everything outside of it. So pretty neat. Let's try Merge. Okay. Merge is an interesting one because what it's done is, again, it's kept a lot of the kind of outside, inside portions, and it's all dependent on what's in front and what's in back. You can see the colors are the same too. We can even subtract what's in the back. So if we minus what's in the back, the square goes away, essentially. So now you have the ability to combine your own shapes. Well, Illustrator took it one step further, all right? What they did was, the Pathfinder is awesome. You guys are going to use the Pathfinder a lot, trust me, especially in this course. But what they did was they wanted it to be speedier, so they developed the Shape Builder tool, and that's Shift-M on your keyboard. Now, the Shape Builder tool is really cool is when you highlight both of them, get your shape builder tool, watch what happens. I click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, and it will create that custom path. It's more intuitive, more interactive. I still, my fall to, or my go-to, pardon me, is the Pathfinder all the time, okay? You guys are going to use this quite often. But now I have the ability to do that on the fly using the shape builder tool. Very, very cool stuff. Very easy to use, too. All right, so those are your shapes. Now, let's go ahead and delete this, and let's draw another circle. And let's look at some colors, okay? We've changed colors pretty easily, but how would you do a gradient? Well, let's go to Window first, and let's look for gradients. Here's gradient right here. Now, as soon as I do this, I'll notice, well, this is not the same as this, so maybe I need to select it. Well, when I do that, I can set it to a specific gradient. And this is really nice too, maybe a radial gradient to get some depth. At this point, I have the ability to kind of adjust the gradient path. I can double click here, and I can set my color. And right now, my color is not really set for anything but black and white, so I'd have to kind of play around with the colors in here. There we go. And I can mess with the opacity, if I chose to do that. The location of the center. I can add more colors, so if I want to add maybe like a darker green in there, I can do that. If I want to get rid of that, I click and drag it, just pull it down. This is the feather. You can see the feather of that. And I can get a nice gradient. Now the thing with gradients, okay, if I have two shapes, and I'm going to click away here, always remember, just click in the gray when you're in doubt. I'm going to grab this color, and I'm going to draw a circle, and let's go ahead and merge these and see what happens. Unite. Well, there goes my gradient. Well, okay, the gradient went away because I merged the layers. Now, I can get a gradient back. I highlight it, I hit linear, it comes back. It calculates the easier color. I also have the gradient right here. So if I wanted to do that, I could use my little caret keys and go back and forth through that. I have a lot of options, but just remember, I'm going to keep going back here. All the way back. Do paint style, there we go. And it's going to like kind of undo what we did. So when in doubt, you just go back to your gradients, set your color swatches. It looks good. You know, I really don't want white here. I think we'll do this, and then we'll go to maybe a lighter shade of this. A little yellow. Yeah, that's nicer. There we go. I like that. Cool. And we can kind of get this shape. Now, that's just with gradients. Now, if we have the gradient tool, which is G on our keyboard, you can see right there, when we have a gradient activated and we click this tool, we get our slider. So we can move where that gradient shows up. Now, you can only put one gradient on one shape, and we're going to learn another way to do that in another lesson, maybe even a little today. I may even just kind of hint at it. But we have the ability to make that gradient tighter, smaller, more angled, kind of facing a different way. It gives it the illusion of light and whatnot. All sorts of options. And we're going to just kind of click away here, and you'll see now we have this gradient. We can't add two gradients. We're stuck with this. It is what it is. All right. So we have the ability to colorize things. So we can put gradients on things. We can put colors on things. We can put strokes on things. Okay, again, we can add a little stroke right there and maybe change it to an artful brush here. All right, we have the ability to do all sorts of things. Now, the important part is we've created shapes, we've created colors. What if we want to put more than one gradient on it? Well, let's start by just going back to a standard color. They've created a tool called the gradient mesh, which we'll learn about later in the semester. The gradient mesh is pretty cool because what this allows us to do is it creates wireframes and allows us to put, if I double click here, custom colors. And I'm going to make this one pretty bright so you guys can see it. There it is. Create custom colors and really kind of help morph basically what we're looking at here. Morph the lighting, all sorts of fun stuff. There it is. Pretty neat stuff. Alright, so that's the gradient mesh tool. We'll learn a lot more about that as we get to go, and you'll see that in some of the tutorials we have. Alright, so we can combine things, we can use the basic tools. You guys pretty much are set for starting. Now, the biggest question is, well, how do I get it out of here? How do I save it? Well, I have multiple options. File, save. If I do that, it's going to save it as an Illustrator format. It also gives me an option to do an EPS, so something like a PDF I could do, all sorts of stuff. And I'm going to drop this to my desktop, and I'm going to hit save. Now, when I hit save, it gives me options to use the legacy files. Legacy. This means it will open in earlier versions of Illustrator with minimal loss. So that will allow me to do that. Very, very good stuff with that. All right, so that's one way. Save as will work. Now, if I want to make this a JPEG or a raster image, I'm going to need to export. So I'm going to export this as a JPEG on my desktop here, and I'm going to make sure it's a 10, it's maximum size, and I'm going to export it out at 150 dpi resolution. So we're going to do that. That's going to save. And I think we're going to save it as Illustrator. I don't know if I saved it. It's going to replace it. Yeah. There we go. So now what we have are two files. Close my Pathfinder here. I have a JPEG, which is roughly half a megabyte, and we have an Illustrator file, which is editable, which is 1 megabyte. Not very large files. This one cannot be changed. This one, if I open it up, can still be edited. So you can see I can change, get a little crazy there with that, I can change whatever I want into it. So that's the basic beginning guide to Illustrator, how to save files, how to build shapes. Now it's your turn. Now what I want you to do is I want you to read some of the documentation I provided for you. I want you to learn about each one of these tools, okay? What do they do? What would be used in what situation? Some, like the perspective tool, we're not going to use for a while. Others, like the blob brush and the brush tool, we may use right away. We're going to have other tutorials on some of these paintbrush tools as we go on. But for now, what you guys have noticed is just you have a basic understanding of your selection tools, your A and V tools right here, and an ability to kind of move things around. We have the ability to copy and paste. We can duplicate if we want to. I didn't mention that. If you hold the Option key, you can duplicate. I'm holding down the Alt or Option key. Make like a cloud storm here. You guys can also change colors. There we go. And we can have a lot of fun with this. Alright, so that's your basic beginning guide to Illustrator. Nothing fancy, nothing pretty, but down and dirty, a basic kind of rough and tumble way of getting around. Hope you guys enjoyed the lecture, and there will be many more to come. So I'm looking forward to you guys practicing this and getting excited for the next thing we're going to learn.